We are back for another episode of Beyond Barriers. Beyond Barriers is a conversation with leaders and community evangelists about the challenges of navigating an effective accessibility strategy. In these conversations, guests get to share their journey of successes and setbacks with a primary focus on how they've overcome specific obstacles that could have disrupted their journey. My name is Brian Gavin. I'm the co-founder of Wally, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Nitika Rawat. Nitika, thank you so much for coming on to today's episode.
Oh, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure.
We have a lovely day here, and I'm really excited to dive into our conversation. As I always like to do, I want to have the opportunity to learn a little bit about you and how you got into the accessibility space. So why don't we start there?
Sure. So I've been into the content space for almost 9 years now. And accessibility has been a part of content in each and every space because when we are working for the users, we have to take in consideration a specific part of the audience, which maybe is abled or disabled, but they are our audiences, right? So especially thinking about how they read or access your content has been a very important part of my job. So now I sort of very proactively advocate, accessibility content and designing whenever and wherever possible.
So I'd love to kind of size up content space. Talk to me a little bit specifically of what that means in the realm of your role.
Sure. Content. So I am into content strategizing, content writing, working on content calendars about our company. So when it comes to accessibility in content, it means deciding how we are putting ahead the content for people of all kinds. Like, for example, if I'm putting an image, am I putting an alt image text for people who can't view that image? If I have a certain contrast in the website of the colors, am I considering people who cannot actually view that contrast in the right way? So, these small nuances of designing the content, the text, with how it's presenting visually, that balance is what I would say is accessibility experience and content. And it is also, I feel, a part of us getting more humane because it's about empathy for the end users, right?
Yeah, I love that you said, you work for the users, right? I think that was I don't know if that was intentionally called out, but it seems like it was where, internally at a brand and within an organization like yourself, we as content strategists work for the end user.
Right.
Content in the realm that you're talking about is very broad and overarching then, right? Because you're talking about the written content that's going into the site. You're talking about the visuals, still or motion based. And so it's kind of an all encompassing, how is the brand represented to that end user that you work for, right? Am I understanding correctly?
Absolutely. Yes.
So I'm curious to, you've been in the content space for quite some time. With the technologies that are available for the end user to consume content, has it changed your strategy in terms of what you deliver or how you deliver the content?
Well, yes. Firstly, what I've noticed is as we are getting more and more tech savvy, more and more tools are coming in where you can make your content more accessible for various kind of audiences. So that is definitely a plus. But at the same time, I also feel like accessibility is something that companies consider at the last moment.
Mm.
And also keeping up with all the updates that are coming for the accessibility experiences is also a challenge. So while the technology is helping us making experiences better, keeping up with the standards that are coming up is a thing that we have to always keep in mind. So it comes with pros and cons. And of course, if we follow the technical advancements, it's definitely going to make experiences better. for the end users.
How I'm curious, how are you measuring the experience for the end user?
Well, there's not just one metric, but it's a combination of a lot of factors. So, for example, a direct measurement would be the increase in the rate of time consumed on the website for users. If it's getting increased, if the engagement is getting increased, if the bounce rate is getting decreased, that's the first metric that we can always check. Secondly, getting direct feedback from the end users. Once I was connecting with a customer and he was visually impaired, and that's when we were trying to work on our website, and his feedback on how all text helps him, understand what's there on the screen, that really built up our morale to make more such accessible content. So these are some very indirect and direct ways how we can, understand if our whole system is accessible or not. And definitely there are audits that we can do to understand if the whole website is accessible or not.
Hmm. Would you say that you're the evangelist or the champion for accessibility within your department or your organization, or are there others that are driving towards the mission of accessible experiences as well?
Well, it's a combination. I won't say that I am the flag bearer because I don't think it's a one man's work. You need to take approvals from all the stakeholders, and everybody needs to be on board to make such a impact. So I do it with my own team members, and we sort of understand how do we want to put it ahead. Of course, there are sometimes design and technical challenges. Like for example, you would want to present it for the accessible experience. It might not go along with your brand guidelines. So a balance has to be made, right? So yeah, I'm not a direct leader in that, but an evangelist for sure.
Got it. So I think you kind of talked about the dependence that you have on the other teams, design and tech most notably. So, what are some of the aspects that you're doing with the other teams to drive an effective strategy around accessibility?
Well, mostly my work is for the content that is put on the website.
Yep.
So once I am done with the content, the written content, how it is being portrayed on several pages, what are the visual aspects of it, is what I sort of give in my inputs. And that is when a balance comes in between the brand guidelines. And I work with the design team. So the design team is a direct stakeholder of this. And that's how we decide on how the accessibility has to be done on the website.
Mm. It's I think you're from the best practices that I hear from other organizations and what we see as effective at Wally, having each department, the brand team, the content strategy team like yourself, the design and tech, all have a role in accessibility. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, is like most often at an organization, it's a last minute consideration and it kind of gets thrown on the developers, and they're not the ones who can inform a good content strategy, just like you probably wouldn't be the person to inform good code, right? So it just happened organically that each of the teams was going to have a hand in it, or was there a concerted company strategy to embark on this accessibility focus across the entire content supply?
Well, honestly, as the company is growing, we are getting more brand oriented and more, uh, I would say, considerate about the end user experience. Because
Yeah.
I don't think that when you are just putting out the product out, you don't think about these all things, whereas it should be what you think. But for us, it's as the company is growing, we are also thinking on how we can make the experiences better for all end users, not just the ones that are abled or disabled. We don't segregate because it has to be like we say that like everyone's equal, so you have to make experiences equal for all. And for us, it's now as we are growing more, we've raised a lot, like $150 million funding, so we are kind of getting more into providing the end users the best accessible experiences we can. So for us, it's been a growth journey.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of hit the something that you shared that I love is the self-awareness, right? I mean, I think as an individual or as a company, that ability to have that awareness, maybe a little bit of an empathy approach to understanding your users, understanding the importance of being inclusive. But in the end, you're probably still left with some challenges, right? You called out the last minute consideration or keeping up with the standards. What would you say are some of the big macro challenges that you see around accessibility and driving an effective strategy?
Challenges would be definitely technical issues, technical problems that we come across. And
Mm,
in addition to that, I think getting everyone on board while framing an accessibility experience is a major challenge. Because I, as a content strategist, would want the content to go in a certain way to the end user. But when it comes to design, when it comes to the developer, I'm not sure if they are on board. So to make everyone understand, because what is priority for me might not be a priority for them. And so that whole experience, bringing everyone on board, has been one of the major challenges, I would say.
How do you overcome? I mean, you talked about, the company growth, um, part of the funding of driving the company forward. You're maybe able to hire more specialized roles. Is that the means to addressing and overcoming that obstacle of being on board or being able to implement what you're asking, or what's the key to resolving that challenge?
Well, I would say, first of all, understanding we are all humans. So just persuading and keeping at it. Because I think when we just give examples of, how we have actually benefited by giving more accessible experience to the people who are not on board, giving actual numbers. For example, if I have a accessible page, like a very well designed web page, and it's increased the number of visitors and the bounce rates are decreased. So it definitely is a very tent metric that yes, an accessible experience is what users are wanting, needing. So persuading, keeping at it, and looking after numbers, because what is measured is what is growing, right? You see your growth by measuring. And then definitely I think interacting with as many end users,
Yeah.
I think that's the best. Because especially when I'm framing content, understanding what the end user wants is the basic for me to start working on any content.
What do you hear from your users that they want?
My so of course everyone has a different need. For some users, I would not want to go in the depth like I go for like understanding the contrast, understanding the alt text. Some users are very easy, but then of course when we think about everyone, the common feedback is that they need those nuances also to be taken care of, and which makes sense. Like,
Elaborate on that for a second. Help me understand that.
for example, for me, preparing a checklist of, okay, these are the things that I need for a accessible experience for my end users. That kind of checklist is what is going to help me as a content strategist come up with a more accessible content for everyone, for not just one group of my end users. So I think that has been helpful. And that is what we are also updating this whole process, because as we are growing, we are learning. So I won't say we are perfect at it, but this is how we are learning, creating checklists and understanding what more can be added to make the experience better.
One thing I'd love to get your take on is you talked about one of the challenges keeping up with the standards, and standards often are framed around compliance, right? Everything that you've spoken about so far is around experience and measuring the impact of engagement metrics, which kind of comes back to, fundamentals of good marketing and overall, good experience. How do you define accessible experiences within your organization? Because I haven't heard compliance come up yet.
Yeah. Um, that's probably because we are learning as we are growing. So it's not that we were all set and we had our blinders on that we have to make it accessible. Some things you learn as you grow. So right now, what we are doing is we are sort of doing it from our end. And when you say that what is accessibility, what we think is creating an all-inclusive, accessible experience for all our end customers. Especially because I am into the content side. So for me, it's not just on the website, it's also on the documents we roll out. It's also on the soft copies that are rolled out. It's also on the pamphlets that go out. It's also on the hard copies that we are printing.
Right. It's I don't know if omni-channel or multi-channel, right, which we want to kind of consider it, but the overarching rollout is across all of the digital domains and even or the analog domains if it's a pamphlet that's going out.
Correct.
So, I am 100% on board with building inclusive experiences, tying them to the success metrics like you're sharing. If that is going to probably get your brand further than worrying about compliance checklists. Why is the keeping up with the standard a challenge then?
Well, I think keeping up with the standard is a challenge because as we are growing, first of all, the standards are increasing, right? Like you don't have the standards today that were 10 years ago. So as the standards are increasing, we also have to think about, okay, what are the areas where we can improve? So first of all, getting everyone on board within the organization and then also balancing what's happening outside the company, like the standards are coming up. So I think that is where the struggle is, balancing the both.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I personally would love to see a tighter connection between the standards that in many ways are, I think, legally, they're viewed from a legal vantage point, right? Are we legally compliant with this? And everything that we're talking about is, are we compliant to the usability and the inclusiveness that we want to provide as a brand? And, I know that, YCAG and other global standards are there, but, I think there needs to be a little bit of more of a call to action around these standards driving inclusivity and usability of content, and less so, well, my legal counsel wants me to address accessibility because it could get us sued, right? Because that's where I think a lot of the challenges that I hear with organizations, that was kind of like what I was thinking from your standpoint is like, yeah, keeping up with the standard is a challenge. But then are you keeping up with the standards from a legal compliance standpoint, or are you keeping up with the standard from a usability and inclusivity standpoint?
Absolutely. And I think for most of the companies today, it's when it comes to the neck, that you have to make it standardized because of the legal compliances. Whereas it should be done from the starting itself. Like when you are starting to design any accessibility experience, you have to think about all your users, not just for the namesake, but for the full usability. And I think what is important for us to understand is if we are making it accessible, it's not just for the namesake, it's going to help us anyway. It's like an organic marketing, because you are giving leverage like to all the users to access your content. So indirectly you are working for your own self, for your own benefit. And I think maybe this is the idea or thought that companies need to understand, that accessible experiences are only going to help them grow better and more.
So we've touched on some broader changes that exist. I think the last minute consideration, the standards. I guess one thing before we move on, is there someone within your organization that owns what the changing standards are, or is there department ownership?
Right now, we as a marketing team only own it. There's no specific person or a specific department for that. But
Yeah,
I think as we grow and as the company becomes more and more, you know, uh, out there, we might be having a specific department for that.
fair. So your biggest successes and setbacks, how would in the recent 6 months, or what you're trying to address now? What are those types of things?
Well, for me, I think the major setback or the usual setback I feel I encounter is balancing the act between what I want or the vision as an accessible experience and balancing that with our own design guidelines. And it's a very practical challenge to be faced because we have our design guidelines, we have particular colors to cater to on the website. And so when we think about it, there might be some contrasting elements in the colors, right? But for the visually impaired people. And that balancing needs to be there. So I think that, and then of course, sometimes the all text and such nuances need to be taken care of. These are my very frequent challenges, I would say. And
Mm.
sometimes getting everyone on board on how we want to present the content.
I can appreciate the brand guidelines and the representation of the brand, and um, I guess aligning that to the accessibility goals that each department has. What's the compromise there?
Well, compromise might be, like some people would not understand accessibility. Very, very basic thing. For example, I understand accessibility. You understand. You are a evangelist on accessibility experiences. But I don't. But we are humans, and not everybody understands the importance of. Okay, why do I need to change the color just to make it better for other people? So and that's when I said, when you present the numbers, that look, when we are using this more accessible experience, the numbers are increasing, we are getting more traction. That is how we convince other people to be on board. So persuasion is the key. Numbers are the key.
Yeah, it's I talk with a lot of brands and agencies that are, very focused on tying accessibility to greater media effectiveness, which is, I think, kind of what you're highlighting. But I also appreciate that it's a two-prong approach, right? Like the social responsibility of having an inclusive experience. Some of that is not as measurable as the time on site or the bounce rate, but it has an impact, right? So
Right.
purely going after your, core marketing funnel metrics without having that inclusive experience, is there needs to be a balance of that.
Yes.
So where are the biggest disruptions to accessibility going to come from in the future?
I think biggest disruption is already on its way because people are getting more and more inclusive in the ways they look at it. And I can just see it, like we having a conversation on the very basic thing, which everybody needs to understand, is the way to disruption. So I think it's already there because what Wally does is in itself a disruption. Don't you think so? Because now we have companies that are looking at accessibility, just at it, with all blinders on. I think we are here. So I am very positive about accessibility and the work that you're doing.
So the conversations that are happening around accessibility and the awareness itself is a disruptor.
Yes, definitely. Because if we are talking if we are talking about, okay, how can we make these experiences better for all, that thought in itself is a disruptor because we are talking out of what we've been used to. So it's a great leap.
Outside of the conversation and awareness, are there certain solutions or pieces of technology that you see on the horizon as either a content strategist or for the brand overall that's going to support this inclusive experience goal that you've highlighted?
Feel companies offering audits for accessibility experiences is a very good way to actually talk about accessibility, because that in itself will propagate the idea of, okay, we need to think about all experiences. So the
Mm.
audits and the compliances, because when you're doing the audits, you're definitely uh, marking a standard, right? That this is what we need. I think if companies are willing to do that, and if there are new companies coming up. Like I think Wally also offers audits for accessibility experiences. So I think this is a major disruption, and making accessible experiences is the way ahead.
Yeah, I think one piece that, and I can appreciate the passion that you are speaking from, is when we audit, which Wally does, or when we provide solutions and recommendations on how to resolve something within the code or something within the creative, be it that it's your color contrast or the text that you're using. The vantage point of shifting from legal compliance to usability is the huge disruptor, and I think you're kind of getting at that in what you're saying, which is focusing on how navigation of your digital content operates to the end user. When you spoke to the person who was visually impaired, the experience wasn't about, oh, did you notice how compliant we were and that we didn't
Yeah.
have certain YCAG issues. I think you were trying to garner the feedback from the usability of and the contextual understanding that is being provided of the content, right? Because it gets back to like what you were saying, is the way that you want to articulate the brand and the content that you want to include. Sometimes technically there's challenges, right? Well, okay, the ARIA label and the description are going to be read twice, but it can't be the same content. So yeah, I think just continuing to emphasize the aspect of when we look at it from an auditing or solutioning component across the content supply, is finding those providers that are focused on usability. Compliance matters, but if you address usability, you're going to in turn close out the compliance concern.
Absolutely.
Nitika, is there anything that we didn't get to today that you want to highlight or you're particularly passionate about?
No, I think just one thought came up, which is if we start looking at accessibility and the audits as a means to better our experiences for the end user and not just for the namesake of, appliances, the end user experiences are going to be amazing. And also the companies will see a growth in their own action. So I feel it's a win-win for both, for the companies as well as the end users.
I couldn't have said it better and closed out on a stronger note. So I want to thank you so much for joining today's conversation. The challenges that you've highlighted, you kicked off with something that was that will leave a lasting impression, which is you work for the user, right? And I think that is a good reminder in any job that we all work for the end user. So thank you so much. It was a delight to have you on and to learn about how you're driving accessibility. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I absolutely love what Wally is doing. And I can only wish good for you, because, of course, it's not just a technical tool that you're providing to people, but it's also you are caring about people in the humanity form, like you are being empathetic to the end users, and there can be anything better than that. So thank you.
Thank you.